Are you curious about the most important tasting that put California wines on the map? What unique challenges did pioneer winemakers in California face back in the day? And what would surprise you about how the California wine industry has developed? We're going to get those stories and tips from our guest tonight. But before I introduce him, I want to welcome you. You're watching this video on the replay, although I'm going to be live in the chat. So dive in. Tell me, where you're logging in from. What's the weather like? What's in your glass, or what have you tasted lately? Any of that. I'd love to hear from you. Similarly, if you're watching this live, the video live, I want to hear from you. I'm Natalie McLean, and I teach popular online food and wine pairing classes at nataliemclean.com. And you have just joined the most passionate group of wine lovers who gather every Wednesday at 7 p.m. to talk to the most interesting people in the world of wine. Now, as I mentioned, this is a recorded conversation for my podcast, Unreserved Wine Talk, but I'm here live in the comments, so to speak. I'm talking about my future self. Anyway, so I want to hear from you. What tips are you enjoying? What stories do you like? What questions didn't we answer yet for you? Let me know in the comments. All right, before I introduce our guest, let me just say that 3 of you are going to win a copy of his terrific new book, which we're going to talk about in a moment. All you have to do, oh, there it is. Good product placement there, Mark. You're on cue. All you have to do is email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com and tell me you want to win a copy. I'll choose 3 people randomly from those who email me. All right, back to our guest, Dr. Mark Gudgel. Mark, am I pronouncing your name correctly? Gudgel?
Gudgel, yes. Rhymes with cudgel.
All right, great. Well, for the purposes of the podcast, I'm going to just begin that again so my editor will not have difficulty. So, back to our guest, Mark. Dr. Mark Gudgel taught high school English for 18 years, and he is currently assistant professor of education at the College of St. Mary at Omaha. He is a Fulbright scholar, which is major, brainiac, and delivered a popular TED Talk entitled Empowering Young People to Repair the World. After honeymooning in wine country, Mark and his wife, Sonia, began a wine blog, and soon after he became a regular correspondent for American Winery Guide. From there, Mark went on to write for Food and Spirits, Dine, Edible Omaha, and numerous other publications. Today, he's the regular contributor to Edible Marin and Wine Country, and Napa Valley Life magazines. Mark's new book, which we're going to talk about today, is called The Rise of Napa Valley Wineries, How the Judgment of Paris Put California Wine on the Map. It focuses on the wine industry and issues that surround it. He is also the president of the board of directors for Nebraska Foundation, which raises money for local charities and offers scholarships to aspiring culinary art students and wine professionals. When he isn't teaching or writing, Mark runs marathons, volunteers at his kids' school, and plays board games with his family. He's a very patient man. He lives in Omaha with his wife Sonia and their children, Titus and Zoe. And he joins us now from his office, I believe, in Omaha. Welcome, Mark. So great to have you here with us.
Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here.
Awesome. Okay, so before we talk about the book specifically, which is just coming out as we talk now, what was the exact moment you realized you actually wanted to write about wine?
You know, it had never occurred to me to write a blog in my life. As an English major, I write a lot, and I think English majors, all of us probably aspire to publish on some level. And I had written a book of poetry, and I'd written a teacher's guide to the genocide in Darfur and things like that. But it hadn't dawned on me to blog about wine. And then when we got back from our honeymoon, my wife said, "Hey, we should do this," and I thought, "Yeah, that's a great idea." And it went so well that people reached out and hired us. So.
That's terrific. Wow. And yeah, I buried the lead there, but how do you get from writing about the genocide in Darfur to wine? Like, what was your interest on that very serious issue?
Sure. I think, if when people ask me about my field, my professional writing up to this point, has largely been genocide studies, and I specifically look at genocide education and how we teach about genocide, be it the Holocaust, the genocide of the Armenians, that which took place in Bosnia in the 1990s, and countless other examples. I worked in Rwanda for 6 years, right? So I've taught classes on genocide for most of my career. I'm not currently. And I'm currently studying and researching the way American teachers teach about genocide. Wine is a hobby, and I'm glad to be able to write about it. I'm glad to be able to taste it. I've stopped reviewing it. I've come to find reviewing wine objectionable because it's art. And I think that art makes our lives beautiful. Right? And so I love having art in my life, and because of the seriousness of my professional studies, it also allows me a nice sense of balance.
Terrific. And what, we won't go down this rabbit hole too deeply, but what drew you to the topic of genocide itself? Why that among all kinds of other issues in the world?
Sure. So as art goes, I think wine and culinary arts and painting and sculpting and countless other examples are all equally beautiful, more or less, and it's a matter of what you appreciate. When it comes to genocide, I don't know how you could argue there's anything more urgent or immediate or important. Right? This is the absolute bottom tier of Maslow. This isn't about my self-esteem. This is about death, and often the deaths of millions. And so, and it's completely preventable, right? And so that, I think, is where I see a great sense of urgency in it. And I believe that education is probably our best shot at preventing it.
How admirable. So maybe you could take us kind of to the high and low of your writing career. It can be writing or wine writing specifically, but what's kind of been the worst moment? We'll end with a happy ending, but what has been your worst moment so far in writing?
Oh, man. Anybody who writes will tell you that those are pretty, the bad moments are pretty ubiquitous. You pour your life and your heart into something, and then somebody lambasts you for it. I just wrote a really good article, and the first comment on my Instagram was some guy whining about me not including his corporate winery.
Wow.
I was just like, shut up.
Small world for these people.
But honestly, I think that the worst moment by far, I wrote a book to teaching about the genocide in Darfur back in, I think it was 2010, and I really believed in my youthful naivete that this book was going to be the fuel that teachers needed to make this topic the point of emphasis for a generation that was already empowered and ready to act. And that I was going to be an integral part in bringing about an end to the genocide in Darfur.
Wow, that's ambitious.
Because I thought this book would really be a key. And as far as I can tell, very few people read the book. The genocide in Darfur, many people would argue, ended, although if you're keeping up with current events, there's, Darfur is the western region of Sudan, and what's happening today is mostly in the south. But, Sudan is still in tremendous turmoil, whether genocide is occurring actively or not. And so it was really eye-opening to me to realize that I had put a lot of time and effort into accomplishing very little. So that was a rough moment for me, but it was also a great learning experience.
It's good that you can recover and carry on. What would be the best moment of your career so far?
Well, being interviewed by you, of course.
That was a setup. We discussed that fully before this. No, we didn't. Okay, your second best moment.
I've had some really great experiences in a number of, I once had a former foreign exchange student from the Netherlands reach out to me on social media with a picture of my poetry book, which was published even before the Guide to Darfur, 15 years ago. And he said, "Did you really write this?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "I found it in a used bookstore in Amsterdam."
Wow.
And I love imagining how it got there.
Yes.
You know,
Exactly.
but you know, I recently sent a copy of my book to one of the people who I interviewed for it, and his, I'd love to just read you his comments about it, but he
Please.
went, well, I don't have them handy. I'm
Oh,
so
okay.
sorry, but like,
That's all right.
you know, I could probably pull it up in my text messages, but he complimented it in a way that, so he said that he loved the way that I had woven the narrative and the stories of these people together. And that was a serious goal of mine in writing the book, because I think I regard Khaled Hosseini as the greatest author of our generation, and his book And the Mountains Echo does exactly that. It weaves together these stories over space and time in a way that I've never seen in another piece of writing. And while I knew I couldn't mimic him, because as an English teacher, I know what great writing is, and I don't do that. I write well, but I'm not a great writer, and I'm at peace with that. I just try to get a little better every day. But when he made comments about my book that were the kind of comments that I had made about And the Mountains Echoed, I was elated.
Oh, that's fabulous. Yeah. When a careful reader really gets you, understands what you're doing, and thinks you're doing it well, there's no better compliment or affirmation. That's fantastic, Mark. So, in retrospect, would you have done anything differently on your path to get where you are today?
You know, I believe firmly that if you're happy where you are, you don't get to complain about how you got there. And so I don't really believe in regrets. You know, and I have to be really cautious, because, I mean, yeah, if I knew now, or if I knew at age 20 what I know now, I would have gotten an enology degree from Davis. But you know, I wouldn't have met my wife. I wouldn't have my amazing children. My daughter turned 6 today, and we already went out to breakfast together before school. And I'm quite pleased with my life, and so I don't think I get to make those changes, you know.
Lovely. Wow. So what drew you to the story of the Judgment of Paris? And you can preface that if you want as to what this was, however you want to tackle it. But as some people listening may not know what exactly it was. But what drew you to it?
Oh, absolutely. I think, you know, my initial introduction to it was what many people's probably is, and that was the movie Bottle Shock with Alan Rickman, which is a delightfully entertaining movie. It's not terribly accurate, but, you know, be that as it may. It's a lot of fun, and I love Alan Rickman. Rest in peace. So, you know, that was my introduction to it. But the more I looked into it and the more I studied wine, this is the single most important thing that has ever happened in the world of viticulture. Full
Not
stop.
just California, but all viticulture?
No, this is the most important thing that has ever happened to wine.
Huh.
And what it is, for anyone who hasn't read my book or the only other book about it, which is by George Tabor, is a wine tasting, a blind wine tasting that took place in 1976. It was put on by an Englishman in Paris, and they tasted California wines and some tremendous French wines. And a highly credentialed panel of French judges preferred the American wines. And a journalist, George Tabor from Time magazine, was there and wrote the story. And so that's it in a nutshell, right? But what happens after that, and what's so brilliant about this, and I don't even know if Tabor really pieced it all together at that time, but he called this in Time magazine the Judgment of Paris, which is an allusion to the event that sparked the Trojan War, right? And we don't have to get too deep into Greek mythology, but, you know, he was alluding to the event that leads to the invasion of Troy, calling this the Judgment of Paris, when Eris, the goddess of discord, is not invited to the wedding of the parents of the warrior Achilles. And so she shows up at the gates and pitches in this apple that says, "To the fairest one." And the goddesses want it, and Zeus is smart enough to say, "I'm not going to tell you who's the fairest, but Paris, Prince Paris of Troy, isn't." And so he chooses Aphrodite, which ticks off the others. And anyway, right, the reason I bring it up, and the reason I think it is significant, and I allude to it a lot in my book, is that the walls come down. right? That's how Troy is conquered, as they lead the Trojan horse inside and burn the place to the ground.
Right.
What happened in France in 1976 is that the walls surrounding the mythology of superior French terroir were razed to the ground. And it was then discovered and then reinforced subsequently time and time again that world-class wine is made all around the world, in Australia, in New Zealand, in Chile, in South Africa, in the United States, in Canada, where you are. They make phenomenal wines all around the world. Prior to that, there was very little export market for anything that wasn't French. And the reason that today you can buy an Argentine Malbec in the grocery store is because of this tasting in 1976.
Wow, I didn't realize it was so pivotal, but when you put it in that sort of context, I can see how its ramifications spread. Because really, I mean, what was so amazing was that these wines were tasted blind. You know, no one knew the identity of the wines, and they were judged by French experts. So
Yes.
it wasn't, there was no rigging, there was no trying to slip in or, whatever. It was the French experts saying, California at the top.
Precisely. In fact, Stephen Spurrier, who was the Englishman who put on the tasting, remarked repeatedly, he's like, I didn't skimp on the French wines. Those were the best French wines I had access to. You know, these are first growths, almost all of them. Puligny Montrachet's and Chateau Mouton, and I mean, stuff you've heard of, right? Even if you're not a wine person, you've heard of these.
Are you still there?
I am. Can you hear me? Uh-oh. Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you, yeah.
Oh, good. I'm sorry.
No
Where
worries.
did we leave off?
You had said the best wines were there, the Puligny Montrachet's. I mean, and they had the first growth Bordeaux's too, right? Like the
Absolutely.
Chateau Margaux and
Margaux,
Palmer.
Mouton, Montrose, yes.
wow. So the best of the best. They weren't easy gaming it. Wow.
No, not at all, not at all. And Spurrier did not think this would happen.
Huh. Why do you think he organized it in the first place then?
Well, he was nudged, certainly. His American partner, Patricia Gasto Gallagher, had been tasting with a woman named Dupuy, or had been corresponding with a woman named Dupuy in California, and had been convinced that these wines were probably worth tasting. And so she toured and thought they were, and so then Stephen Spurrier and his wife Bella toured and really believed that they were worth tasting. And so they thought they'd have these French judges taste the American wines. Great, no problem. And then what Spurrier realized, very much to his credit, was that the French judges were going to say a few nice things and dismiss the wines because they were American. And so when they come in, and this is all in my book, but when the judges arrive, he says, when the judges arrive, he says, I've changed the rules. If you don't like it, if you don't agree, I'll change them back. But I thought we should taste these American wines alongside some of the premier wines of France in what he called a friendly glasses across the ocean tasting. And this, of course, is happening in 1976, right, 200 years after the United States won the Revolutionary War with the help of the French. And so, it's very much a tribute to General Lafayette. It's intended to be a sort of a friendly thing, and it ends up sort of being anything but.
Wow. And, excuse me. So you've mentioned George Tabor's book, the only other one, which was published years ago. How is your book different? They both focus on the Judgment of Paris. George Tabor was there as the Time correspondent you mentioned, but I'm just curious how they differ.
Yeah, it was fun. Warren Winiarski had the same question.
Oh yes, a winemaker, famous winemaker.
Yes, he made the 73 Stag's Leap wine cellars that won the red tasting, and it's phenomenal. And he's phenomenal. He's an incredible human. I provide a lot more of the backstory.
Okay.
I provided, it's a 5-chapter book, about 200 pages long, so they're long chapters. My first chapter is really a history of the Napa Valley up to Prohibition, and I started in what I frequently, I stole a word from one of my favorite other writers about Napa, but I frequently refer to that period of Napa as prelapsarian, right, before the fall of man. This was the Garden of Eden, and so we looked at the Onosadas people, the Wapo, and really tried to provide a contextual overview for what it is that gets Napa to this place, that makes it so special that something like this even had the potential to occur.
And what was that you discovered?
Well, I mean, there's so much. One of the things is that the North American plate and the Farallon plate did us a huge favor and created this incredible fertile riparian valley that contains half of the soil types in the world in a space that's 30 miles by 5 miles. So that's incredible. It is positioned just north of San Pablo Bay, but has the Mayacamas separating it from the cooling forces of the Pacific. So, I mean, it is the perfect place to grow many grape varietals, although, of course, that is changing with the changing climate. We'll talk about that more. But it really is a phenomenal place. And the second thing, and I just remarked on this, I was out in Napa last week with my wife, speaking at a conference and doing a few other things and tasting, of course, and visiting friends. I remarked to her every time we drive up 29 or the Silverado Trail, I'm like, can you imagine, 150 years ago coming to this place and being like, yeah, I think I'll quarry some stone and see if I can't grow grapes here. Like, I mean, these pioneers, if I may, were just some of the most bold, ambitious, probably outlandish people imaginable to think that they were going to make a go of it. And had they not laid that groundwork, and then had people like Mondavi and others after Prohibition not reinvigorated the place, we wouldn't have this.
Wow. Tell us about a couple of those people that were the early pioneers, the more colorful ones, or the ones that made the best contributions.
Sure. I think, so early on, Tiburcio Perot and the Beringer brothers are some fun stories. Tiburcio Perot is the one that gave the Beringer brothers German immigrants. Tiburcio was Mexican. The Beringers were German, of course, and he named them Los Hermanos, which is the name of one of their famous vineyards now, right? And they were both in close proximity near what today is St. Helena. There's some great stories about them. One that's in my book, Tiburcio Perot, digs these incredible wine caves at what today is Spring Mountain Vineyards, and has the Beringers over one night. And he says, you know what? My caves are so strong they'd withstand a blast of dynamite. Well, these three guys are drunk, and so they decide to find out. And those caves did not, in fact, sustain a blast of dynamite. And I believe they finished excavating them 2 years ago.
Oh, my goodness.
So, I mean, there's some great, kind of funny, silly stories like that. But there are also that next wave of pioneer. These are some amazing humans. Cesare Mondavi and, of course, his sons, Robert and Peter, deserve and Rosa as well, Cesare's wife, deserve a tremendous amount of credit for putting the Napa Valley on the map. And Robert, of course, with his own winery after the fact in Oakville.
What did his father do to set the groundwork? Because we hear a lot about Robert Mondavi, but excuse me, his father, what was his contribution?
Yeah, so Robert actually, Rosa probably gets most of the credit for convincing Cesare to go take a look at the old Charles Krug winery. Charles Krug is probably the oldest commercial winery in the valley. It was founded by a Prussian named Charles Krug, and it's a beautiful structure today, but it was completely dilapidated when the Mondavis found out that it was for sale. And Cesare and Rosa already had an investment in a winery called Sunny St. Helena, which today is Maryvale. And so they weren't terribly interested. Cesare wasn't. But Robert really thought this was something they ought to look into. And Peter was up for it. Peter was back on furlough, I believe, at that time. And so they went up and checked it out, and they bought it with, I think, well over 100 acres for, I think, $75,000 maybe, which, thinking about what it's worth today is a lot of fun. But, it's quite an investment. But, I think they started producing wines. They wanted to produce exceptional quality wines, and Prohibition had really destroyed the American palate for wine. Very few wineries had been able to carry on. Those that had were mostly selling grapes or juice, concentrate, because we weren't actually serious about prohibition. So, the male head of the household could produce 200 gallons of wine at home if he wanted to. Which, I mean, that's stupid, right? Just let professionals make it at that point. But instead, as I mentioned in my book, Tom in Poughkeepsie buys grapes from the Napa Valley and ferments them in a lead clawfoot tub in his garage and dumps enough sugar into it that he can choke it down. And that becomes what we think wine is, unfortunately. And it takes a long time for the American wine palate to recover. But the Mondavis had a lot to do with that. So did the Davies at Schramsberg, who had a vision for making sparkling wine, and a number of other really extraordinary people. Joe Heitz comes to mind.
What did Joe Heitz contribute?
Well, he's the one that Spurrier called the charming curmudgeon, and Heitz made exceptional wines, and he was completely uncompromising. He also had a very distinct vision for wine. Heitz believed that he was a winemaker, and that he would focus on that, and that the wine growers or the grape growers were a different group of people, and that they could focus elsewhere. So he would buy the grapes and make the wine. And that was a different approach, certainly a different approach than the French vignerons who did everything. He produced some extraordinary wines. His Cabernet Sauvignon was tasted at the Judgment of Paris.
Huh. How did it fare there?
Well enough. It didn't win. Right. The winning red wine was the 73 Stag's Leap wine cellars, which was made from 3-year-old grapes, or 3-year-old vines, grapes harvested from 3-year-old vines, which
That's
again
phenomenal.
tears down a stereotype. That maybe
it does, because we
believed.
traditionally think that vines must age to about 7 years before they start producing decent fruit.
Yeah, and everybody loves to advertise their old vine, and that's great, because I do think old vines produce exceptional quality wines, but not uniquely so. The winemaker has a great deal to do with that, and then of course the 73 Chateau Montelena won the whites. In subsequent tastings, Bernard Portet, right next to Stag's Leap, had produced the Clos de Vol that won the 86 reenactment, right? They thought that one, because everybody thought after the judgment in 76, they're like, well, maybe I think the American wines just drink better young, and made all these dumb excuses, right? So they held the tasting again in 86, and this time it was another Napa wine, but it was Clos de Vol that won. And in 96 and all the subsequent after that, it's Ridge Montebello that ages the best, from the Santa Cruz AVA, right? Made by Paul Draper, who's another wonderful person that I got to interview in writing this book. So
he's fascinating. What do you think he contributed to California wine?
Oh, man. One thing that Paul did that I think is noteworthy, and this is not advice I would give anybody, but he didn't formally study winemaking.
Huh.
I guess he did study it, just not in college, right? He studied it by drinking extraordinary wines and making them alongside other people and learning by doing, but he didn't go to Davis, or any of the other great programs. So, he's interesting in that way. But
so, do you think he's a less technical winemaker, or
not at all?
No,
not at all. He is so good. I got to spend a whole day with him at Ridge, and I mean, that guy. It probably goes without saying, but he's forgotten more than I know, and has really been producing some of the best wines in the world for a generation and a half now. I mean, those Montebellos they don't miss. We drank a 2011 together, and 2011 is a vintage that a lot of troglodytes wanted to malign when it came out. The 2011s are phenomenal, and so he had said, what do you want to drink? And I was like, whatever you want. And he opened an 11 on purpose just to show how well it had done,
Yeah, so. Tough vintage is kind of the proof of great winemakers, when they can still produce something that is not only good but can age. So when they did these reenactments...
I want to add to that just because I think it's so important. I was with Tim Mondavi last week, right? Tim is one of Robert's sons, and I was with Tim Mondavi at Continuum, his property, last week, and he poured me a 2020 on purpose, and it was extraordinary. And I went, this is the wine I'm going to reference when people want to beat up on the 2020s, because it's got everything to do with winemaking.
Amazing. And when they did these reenactments, were they tasting wines that had aged as opposed to new vintages?
Yeah, so to my knowledge, they've never reenacted the white wine tasting with original vintages. But yeah, they used original vintage wines in the 86 and some after that as well. Yeah, to see how well they
as
aged.
were in the 1976 tasting. That was the exact same vintages were moved forward to these reenactments.
Right, and that's why, so the 69 Freemark Abbey, which was made by Jerry Looper, was not included in any of the subsequent tastings because Freemark Abbey said that they thought it had passed its prime. Huh. Whether it had or not, I couldn't say. I've had some old Freemark Abbeys that I thought were great. But.
So that is a misconception, I guess, that California wines don't age.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, there's some rocket juice being produced. The people who were slaves to Parker's 100-point ratings are producing these chewy, pulpy, over-the-top wines that we sometimes kind of disparage as rocket juice that I enjoy, frankly. But I don't know that those are terribly age-worthy. But, I was out with a couple of wonderful sommeliers who became friends a couple weeks ago, and we opened a 20-year-old bottle of Smith Madrone Cabernet Sauvignon. These are a couple of the best palates in the world, and it knocked all of our socks off. We were just floored by it.
What does that aged California wine taste like? Like I think I've tasted more aged Bordeaux just because they've been available to me than aged California wines. So, what happens? Do you think, or you can be specific to the wine you tasted as it aged? Like, does it age differently from a Bordeaux, or what?
It can. They're all different, of course, but like the 03 Smith Madrone we were drinking. Smith Madrone wines are mountain fruit, high elevation, spring mountain, and they've been making them there since the early 1970s, so they absolutely know what they're doing. But they have a leanness to them that and I think I don't want to call them acid driven because I think that conjures something that maybe isn't fully accurate. But the fruit had held on to this 20-year-old wine magnificently. It would have aged for another 50 years. We shouldn't have opened it, It was beautiful and fun to share and talk about. And 50 years from now, I probably won't be drinking anything. But, it was glorious. But Smith Madrone's Rieslings, that's what I'll drink with you later today. And I had a bottle last night with some friends. But I drink old Smith Madrone Rieslings all the time. They age as well as anything made in Alsace or Germany.
Huh. That's fascinating. Now, you said the movie Bottle Shock, which was supposed to be about the Judgment of Paris, was inaccurate in some ways. How was it inaccurate?
Oh my, where to begin? It does some things really well. In addition to being entertaining, I think it highlights the Barrett family, and I think that they are very important to the history of the Napa Valley, and specifically to the rebirth of the Napa Valley. I think Jim Barrett was a visionary.
And who was he?
So Jim Barrett, as portrayed, I think, by Bill Pullman in the movie, was much like Hugh Davies' father Jack and his wife Jamie and others who just kind of got fed up with corporate America, fed up with their busy city lives, decided that the rural lifestyle and winemaking held an appeal to them, and so Jim Barrett and some partners buy Chateau Montelena. And bring it back to life. It was a winery that had been built by a man named Tubbs back in the 19th century, and a guy who made his money in rope, of all things. And so, he brings this winery back to life. He hires a Croatian winemaker, Mike Gudgel, and puts his son, Bo, who today is still at the winery and at the helm, puts Bo in the cellars, and they produce some really phenomenal wines. And, yeah.
So that aspect of the movie captured Jim Barrett well, but...
Well, they make Jim Barrett the winemaker, for example, and he's not.
Okay.
And they makes Stephen Spurrier into a jerk, right? He's brilliantly portrayed by Rickman, but the idea was to make an Englishman unlikable, and Stephen Spurrier was one of the most likable humans ever, wine trade or otherwise. He was just congenial and kind and wonderful, and he really didn't like being portrayed that way. And then they just completely, the other thing that the movie does that's disastrous is just completely omits the story of Warren Winiarski, whose red wine wins the exact same tasting the same day, and it's like that's so noteworthy that it's almost a lie by omission.
Wow, I wonder why they chose to leave that out. I guess creative.
Yeah, Hollywood. I can't speak to it.
Yeah. Oh well. And so you said the book has 5 chapters. You talked about the early pioneers. Back to Robert Mondavi, do you think his primary contribution was that he was such an excellent marketer in terms of promoting California wine all around the country, or were there other things that he did?
He did 2 things, I think, extremely well, and one of them was absolutely promotion. Selling California wine, when he began doing it, would be like, selling gasoline to someone who drives a Tesla. Like, it was well done. He had his work cut out for him, and he nailed it. And of course, his brother Peter made it a lot easier by making excellent wine. But the other thing that he did is he was so, the thing that set Napa apart was that there was nobody stuck on their tradition. There was nobody who viewed what they knew as proprietary. And so not only did Robert Mondavi bring a ton of great people together, he hired Warren Winiarski, and when Warren Winiarski left him, he hired Mike Gudgel, and when Mike Gudgel left him, he hired Zelma Long, one of the early women winemakers of the Valley. He had so much to do with bringing folks together, but he also, was instrumental, along with Andrei Chelishev and a number of others, in getting people together and going, okay, what are we learning? What do we know? Let's share information, because Mondavi, probably more than anybody else, believed that the rising tide would raise all the boats, and his was the biggest boat, but he wanted to see them all succeed, and I think he gets so much credit for what happened.
And why do you think he succeeded in marketing where others didn't? Now, he had a good product to sell because of what his brother was doing, but what was it about him that convinced people to try California wines, to buy them?
In my study of the Valley and in my time there, I don't know that I've ever seen a picture of him in which he wasn't smiling. Up at Continuum Estate last week, we walked by a bust of him that had been made that his son had acquired, and it sits kind of quietly. It's not gaudy at all, but he's got this sort of Tim Mondavi said he said I used to think he was glaring at me, but now I see that he's actually got a little smile on his face. And I think Robert was always smiling. I think that he was kind and likable. And I didn't know him, but I know so many people who did, and I think you weren't buying Mondavi wine, you were buying Robert Mondavi, and I think it was an easy sell.
It's true. Yeah, that is true for so many products and services. It's really about the people behind them.
Absolutely.
And so then tell us a bit more about how the book progresses. I think we've gotten up to the early pioneers like Robert Mondavi. Then where do you take the story?
Yeah, so what really happens, right? If that tasting had been a one-off, right, then you'd have all these people. I personally find the whole root day, leaf day thing annoying. But
what is this?
I think it's part of biodynamics, but they'll say if a wine isn't tasting well, they'll blame it on the position of Venus or something like that. I'm not trying to be too flippant, but it's nonsense
Okay.
in my personal opinion. But I think that it had been a one-off. People would have blamed it on a root day or blamed it on the judges. Oh, they must have had hot coffee beforehand, or the Chablis that they tasted to awaken their palates must have been tainted with, TCA or God knows what. People would have made something up and written it off. But the thing is, after the Judgment of Paris, It just happened again and again and again. And that was really a lot of the impetus for me writing the book. So, you had asked me to share a wine with you today, and I will. But I would like to share, if I may, a passage from my book. Yes. That kind of exemplifies this. It's about an event that took place very shortly thereafter. And again, there are many of these, and I tried to write about them all. This is from an event called the Olympiade du Vin, the Wine Olympics. Okay. By 1979, the Napa Valley was brimming with people who relocated to wine country to seek their fortunes in wine. Some sought new careers, some investments, some vanity projects. But those like Stu and Charlie, the old guard, who, alongside Chelyshev, Stewart, Gurgich, Barrett, Davies, Heitz, Winiarski, the Mondavis, and many others, had beat the rush, simply continued to do what they'd always done, making great wine in the beautiful place they felt fortunate to call home. So this is about Stu and Charlie Smith of Smith Madrone, who I've already mentioned. One Sunday evening during harvest, Stu remembers being up a ladder at the top of the tank when the phone rang. He climbed back down the ladder to get it. A friend spoke excitedly on the other end of the line. "My mom just got back from Europe," he told Stu, "and she brought the International Herald Tribune with her." Stu waited patiently for the story to get more interesting. After a moment, the friend blurted out, "You won! The Riesling competition, Stu, you and Charlie won!" In the future, the gravity of this information would not be lost on the Smiths. But in the moment, after yet another 17-hour workday, Stu just wanted to climb back up the ladder so that he could finish his work and get home. "Great," he said wearily. "Send it to me." The tasting, put on in 1979 by Gaumillot, comparable to the Michelin Guide, and touted as the Olympiade du Vin, the Wine Olympics, was a truly international affair that far exceeded anything Spurrier or Gallagher ever envisioned. Gaumillot had declined to cover the Paris tasting, but had certainly taken note of the results. The judgment of Paris had raised questions. Gaumillot now sought to answer them. In the Wine Olympics, hundreds of wines from around the world were tasted by expert judges, and the results again were stunning to those who had managed to convince themselves that the judgment of Paris was somehow a fluke. If Napa had failed to capture anyone's attention, the Olympiade du Vin surely succeeded in doing so. As Stu's friend had attempted to impress upon him, Smith Madrone came in first in the world in Riesling, up against the best of Germany, France, and others. It wasn't only the Smiths who triumphed. "You must be mistaken," replied Janet Trefethen into the receiver, and then her mood darkened. If this wasn't a mistake, perhaps it was some kind of rude joke. "I assure you I am not mistaken," said the voice on the other line. "Your 1976. It has been named the best Chardonnay in the world by Gaumillot." Janet was teeming with questions. When did this occur? Who organized it? And most of all, how in the hell did a bottle of her wine get to France? Nobody had contacted the Trefethens about entering a competition. The whole thing seemed strange. But if Chateau Montelena and Stag's Leap wine cellars could do it, then why not Trefethen? She thanked the caller and hung up the phone.
Oh, it's great. You are a great storyteller. I'm so glad you suggested reading a passage, because I was just leaning in going, oh, it's a great story. Much. Yes.
It really is a great story. I was really honored to be able to tell these stories, because I think they're important. And this is maybe where my book adds to what Tabor already contributed.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. If you can weave that all together. And then as the book continues, where do you take it?
So subsequent tastings continue to occur, and the Americans continue to win to the extent that it gets boring. It gets predictable. I think if you've got truly credentialed judges and you taste the best of American wines alongside the best of French, the Americans typically win. And of course, I'm a homer, right? I'm an American, so I kind of lean in on that a little bit. But these are my jam for sure. But then it gets tougher, because the Napa Valley, right? If you've never been, Silicon Valley is hell on earth. It is just a concrete hell of strip malls, and it used to be beautiful. And there are places, if you work hard enough, where you can still find beauty. But then there were people in Napa who went, that's not going to happen here. And they fought like hell to make sure it didn't. One person I've become acquainted with recently working on my next book is Ren Harris. And he and his wife Marilyn, who was a Palissa, who were an old family in the valley, did so much to ensure that the valley would not get taken over. And the Davies worked so hard, and still do. Jack and Jamie's son Hugh still works so hard. And there were many, many others, the Trefethens, who we just mentioned in the book. And you know, I feel rude for not bringing up everyone, you know, but there are hundreds of people who just went, no, we're not going to pave the Napa Valley. You know, California wanted to build an interstate up Highway 29, and it was this small group of citizens who went, you know, hell no, that isn't going to happen. And they're the reason that this place is still so beautiful.
Yeah, because there's
part of it.
All kinds of laws about not building up on the mountains, like keeping the trees there.
Absolutely, and not building vineyards up there. Volker Isley's another one. Randy Dunn, you know, these people that worked so hard to protect the hillsides, protect the riparian corridors, and you know, so the book goes into that, goes into the threat of fire today and climate change and the work of Napa Green. Napa Green is, I think, an extraordinary organization that was founded by the Napa Valley Vintners, but today is independent and works so hard to try to not only sustain the earth, but they're now focusing on regenerative viticulture, which I think is just so important and really groundbreaking. And if they can do it in Napa, it can then they'll set the tone, right? Then we can all do it, right? Then it can be done in Chile and everywhere else. So
tell us about the regenerative efforts that they're doing. What does that mean, especially as it relates to Napa?
Yeah, man, I mean, it's such a diverse topic that Napa Green, I would encourage everybody to get on their website and check them out. They've got these 6 pillars of sustainability that are really worth looking into, one of which is to do with social justice, which I think is hugely important, right? We've always known that wine was, you know, the most important people in wine were often being paid the least and treated the worst. Now, there have been people who have absolutely fought against that. Right. Back in the 70s, Ren Harris, who I mentioned, who founded Paradigm, put together an insurance company to make sure that health insurance could be held by vineyard workers. This was a really progressive idea at that time, and frankly still is today, because if you want to mistreat people, you still could. But I think many in Napa are united against that. But Napa Green and regenerative viticulture, it's, you know, I was at a conference last week, and they were showing us this massive drone that could fly over and drop bugs, which were dormant because they'd been refrigerated, you know, and they were dropping these bugs on the vineyards of Charles Krug and you know, spreading them. I mean, the things, you know, what sheep
good
can
bugs,
contribute.
I assume.
Good bugs. Yes, exactly. But what sheep can contribute to vineyards, right? And what no-till practices can do for vineyards, no-till or low-till, right? I think it's a little naive to say that you're never going to till anything if you're a farmer, but recognizing what tilling does and deliberately limiting how much tillage occurs, right?
And tilling meaning there's a tractor that's turning over the earth?
Digging up the earth, exactly. Yeah. Perhaps to grind cover crops into it or something like that, which releases carbon, right? Which we don't want.
Right. And it destroys the microbiome that's there, all the microbial life. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, you know, there used to be this, like, I think, vision of a beautiful vineyard, which was rows of manicured grapevines with earth in between them. And I think that the new vision for a beautiful vineyard is rows of well-maintained grapevines with a tremendous diversity of life, not only growing but living within it, and that it is its own, you know, little biosphere, so to speak.
Sure, that sounds more beautiful. Little private garden with wildlife, and and so, how is California dealing with climate change? Is that in your book as well?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
And it's, a fair bit. Slowly, which is tough when you feel like something's urgent. But I was speaking with a winemaker I really respect the other day who was counseling caution and saying, look, rushing into these things does not work. And I do think she's got a point. But, you know, there's a lot that we can do. I think that especially with Napa Green, we've recognized that we're past the point of sustainability. If we, as I wrote in my book, if we resign ourselves to merely sustaining where we are, we have resigned ourselves to a long, slow death. We have to regenerate. But the good news is I think we can. And so I think that's what we're looking at. And I think that Napa Valley and many there are truly leading the way.
Okay. So was there anything that surprised you while you were researching or writing the book?
A lot. And some of those things were fun little bits of trivia, and some of them were not so fun. So I asked, one thing that I love, I asked Bernard Portet what I thought was an obvious question. And he indicated to me that maybe it was the first time he'd ever been asked. But he made the wine at Clos de Vol. And of course, his wine won the 1986 tasting, and he's still involved at Clos de Vol today. But the vintage that was entered into the 76 tasting was, I believe, a 72, which was the first vintage of Clos de Vol. Huh. And of course, if they opened their winery, then they didn't grow those grapes. And so I said, Bernard, where did you get the grapes? And it seemed like the most obvious question, but again, I don't know that he'd been asked that before. And he told me where he got them, and it was a blend of 85% Cabernet Sauvignon, 15% Merlot. And I thought it was great because he says, well, the Cabernet Sauvignon we got, I'm not going to impersonate his French accent, I just wish you could hear him. He said, we got it up the road here at what was then something else, and today I believe is Elevet. He said we bought that from them. And he says, and the Merlot? And he kind of looks into the air, he goes, I don't remember where I got that. and I just thought that was hilarious. Like, this is arguably one of the more important wines that's ever been made. We don't know where the Merlot came from, but we know it was good. We know the winemaker was very talented, and still is. But then there were other things. There are people who are sort of apologetic. There's one particular writer who kind of praises George Yount, who I think was a real scoundrel.
Praises who?
George Yount, whom Yountville is named after. He had the first Rancho Camus. He was the first Americano granted a Mexican rancho. Okay. And that's, it was 12,000 acres of the middle of Napa Valley. So, he gifted some to his son-in-law as a dowry, which became Rutherford, and so there's some real history there. But a lot of these folks were real tiresome lowlives, if I may.
How is he a scoundrel? What's the dirt on him?
Well, it's so interesting because there's this one writer, and I don't know the guy. He's been dead for 100 and some years, 150 probably. But there's one writer who's like, well, by all accounts, he was pretty good to the native population, and then there are other writers who literally have written that he had Wapo people scalped, and so, but he's just one of many. Edward Turner Bale, whom the Bale Grist Mill is named after because he had it put in. Bale was a monster. And the Berryessa brothers, who Lake Berryessa was named after, probably enslaved native populations. Wow. And so some of it's like you kind of know some of these things, but when you start actually reading, you just go, gosh, and we still have stuff named after him. But, I drove through Custer State Park last year. We still have things named after Custer? My God. And Columbus, I have a friend who's a wine lover who just moved to Columbus, Nebraska. I'm like, why is anything named after that guy? He's just famous for getting lost, And so
no
I just,
GPS.
Yeah. And no scruples. But, it's just, I don't know. Some of that stuff's annoying, and then it's more than annoying. It's disgusting. But then you look at you look at Napa today, or you look at the wine industry today. There are 4 black master sommeliers in the world, I believe. I know that there are 4 African Americans. I don't know, because the Court of Master Sommeliers in Europe is separate from the Court of Master Sommeliers in America. Okay. I'm only really acquainted with the Americas. But, there are 4. 4, right? Only 10% of Master Sommeliers are women. And certainly not because of inferior palates or any nonsense like that, right? So there's we got a long ways to go. We got a long ways to go. There is one black woman winemaker in Napa, and she's extraordinary, but she shouldn't be alone.
So what needs to change to make that progress?
Well, first, I think we have to talk about it, which is why I made sure to make it a part of a book that it would have been easy to leave it out of, right? If no one was going to press me too hard on why I didn't write about climate change or racial inequity or women's rights in a book on the Judgment of Paris. People would have left me alone about that, but I didn't want to be left alone. I wanted to bring it up. It's important. And it needs to be dealt with. And so I think we need to talk about it. And then we need to actually do things, right? There's some great groups out there, the Roots Fund, Badass Women of Wine, Batonage Forum, and others that are, I think, working to try to make those strides. And then there are brilliant winemakers. We mentioned Zelma Long, of course, but Sally Johnson, Carmel Greenberg, some really amazing women making wine right now who I think very clearly demonstrate this can be done, and more of them all the time. The winemaker Farniente I met last week is a brilliant woman, and there are many others.
Is there anything you've discovered since you wrote the book that you would add to a new edition?
There's, interestingly, this history continues. And so I do look forward to writing about tastings that come after, in which I would predict the results will remain consistent. There will be evolution in the wine trade, in matters of climate change. I could have done more about climate change and how it's being addressed. The timing was sort of fortuitous that my book had not yet come out when Spring Mountain Vineyards filed for bankruptcy, but there will be more story there as we see what occurs next, which I don't know. Mike Gergich just turned 100 years old, but of course that was in April, and so we didn't, have the opportunity to. There wasn't much about that in the book, and so this history, Stu and Charlie are still making wine up on Spring Mountain. Volker Isley's son Alexander and Catherine still run Volker Isley Family Estate, and people are just doing incredible things, and they're all worth talking about. Which is, my book was my publisher, gave me 48,000 words. I wrote 90, and we edited it down to about 54, I think. So there's more to say.
What's your greatest satisfaction in having written this book?
The people that tell me I got it right.
Okay.
And that's not everybody, of course. But so many people have read my book and written kind reviews. Bella Spurrier was quite complimentary, which meant a lot to me because, of course, her husband is an integral part of this story. So yeah, I think those things. Knowing that maybe I told an important story, or maybe even more than one.
And where is your ideal place to have a glass of wine?
With friends. The where is less important than the company. There are restaurants that I love. I love to drink a glass of wine walking through the vineyard, in particular with friends of mine who may have made it or had a part in making it. But I had a glass of Riesling and a glass of Cabernet, actually from Oakville, in my living room with a couple of our best friends and my wife last night, and that was wonderful too.
Huh. Well, you keep teasing us with this Riesling that you've got there, so let's talk about it, Mark.
Okay.
So it's.
I'm going to pull it out of my fridge here in my office.
Yes, please do. And I'm going to bring on while we're waiting, my big red from Camus.
Yeah.
Yes.
Camus. So Camus is named after Rancho Camus, which was the name of the rancho founded by George Yount.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. No extra charge for that.
Okay, thank you. So your vintage of this Riesling, is it recent or is it older?
This is a 2017. Again, these age brilliantly. So I've had the 22.
Okay.
Just very recently. In fact, I visited this winery last week. But they're ageless. They just really, I haven't had anything back from the 80s, but they were making it, and I hope to eventually. But yeah, just, this is, so I mentioned I was at dinner recently in Omaha with two different master sommeliers, and I brought that 20-year-old bottle of Cabernet from Smith Madrone, and because I did that at this restaurant, this extraordinarily little restaurant, which actually is where the introduction to my book is set in Omaha, they said, well, should we try the Smith Madrone Riesling since we're going to drink the Cab? And I said, absolutely. And it was the first time they had had it, and they were so blown away by it. This is as good as any Riesling in the world by all accounts. It is perfect, I think.
Is it a dry Riesling?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
It's a German style. It's always relatively low alcohol. The 2017 here is, well, I know it's against the law not to put it on the label. 12.9% alcohol, which is, not low for a Riesling, but low for any American wine.
Sure.
And you look at that color;
beautiful
it's just
color,
gorgeous, and
golden.
And the the bouquet. I mean, just
what do you get?
Well, the first thing that's so noteworthy is this telltale petrol, right? The petroleum that we know comes off of these great Grand Cru, Premier Cru Rieslings.
What does that come from, in your opinion, the petrol smell? And some people think that's a negative, but I personally love that smell. It reminds me of summer at the cottage and an outboard motor and the water and everything.
Yeah. I am not adept enough at winemaking that I want to speculate. I know that if you called up Stu and Charlie or many other people, they could tell you immediately what's causing their wine to smell like that. But
sure.
I just know I like it. And then it leads quickly into some really beautiful stone fruits, as well as a little bit of tropical fruit, green apple. It's complex and beautiful and perfect with food. This is the white wine I would gladly pair with steak, but
why do you think it works with steak? Because people wouldn't typically think of Riesling with steak.
I never had either. I have a good friend who's an advanced som who throws some kind of tasting ideas my way frequently, and pairing ideas, and one of them is Syrah with Indian food, which you would think this massive meaty wine typically is probably going to struggle with those sauces, right? No. Yeah. Order a smorgasbord of Indian food and open your favorite Syrah and just be prepared to be blown away. But another is a nicely aged Riesling with steak, and I don't know why it works. It doesn't make any sense to me at all, but it's because most things other than Napa Cab don't hold up to steak.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's the caramelization of the steak, like and the petrol of the wine. There's kind of something there in common, because I do find sometimes a buttery Chardonnay will work with a caramelized steak because of the common notes or whatever. But I'm with you. I love the petrol. Some say it comes from the nature of the grape. Some say from the soils or the age. As it ages, it gets more petroly, but I'm a big fan of it. You could call it flinty or stony if you wanted to. But
me too. And I don't, it's funny because people, I don't know. We need to remember that our preferences are only that, right? And if you don't like Brettanomyces, then don't buy those wines. But
right,
don't
the barnyard kind of smell.
Yeah. I mean, all of Randy Dunn's old Cabernets up until like 2004 have really heavy notes of Brett. But they're famous for a reason. Right? They're glorious. They're so good. And if you don't like that, then don't buy them because they're not cheap. But, don't tell us that it's a flaw, for goodness sake.
Speaking of the price, what's the cost of that, or a current vintage of that Riesling? What would it be approximately?
I want to say 35.
Okay.
It'll depend a little on where you're at. Of course, the restaurant will mark it up more, but yeah, it's not dramatic. It's a really reasonably priced wine.
It's affordable, for a great wine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously. That is amazing. Excuse me. So, I mean, the time has flown, but I'd love to do a few quick questions and answers, the lightning round
please.
with you, Mark, if you're game.
I'm having so much fun. I'm in.
Okay, cool. What's the last great book you read?
Well, I mentioned And the Mountains Echoed, and I absolutely
yes.
loved it, but I didn't read that recently. I'm reading Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows to my son right now, which brings me great joy. And I reread Born to Run recently, which I think everyone's a runner. Some people don't realize it, but the answer to every question for me is go for a run. And I'm feeling happy. Good, go for a run. I need to think. Good, go for a run. I'm sad. Perfect, go for a run. I'm tired. Go for a run. I have a lot of energy. Go for a run. And I think Born to Run reinforces that idea, because that's how we survived and Neanderthals didn't. Is we're long distance runners. So.
Well, getting all kinds of history. That's fascinating. Is there something that you believe about wine with which some people might disagree strongly?
Oh, absolutely. Many things. But I think the most important, people ask me all the time, what's great wine? And my answer never varies. Whatever you like, just so long as you can afford it. So, I'm sure Petrus is a great wine, but someone asked me the other day what I thought of Petrus, and I laughed at them. I went, never had Petrus. You know why I've never had Petrus? Because I can buy 1.5 cases of Paradigm Cabernet Sauvignon for the cost of one bottle of Petrus, and I love Paradigm Cabernet. But having said that, drink what you want, and don't. Goodness gracious! If people want to get judgmental, that's their issue. If people want to get people are pretentious and snobby about wine, go away. That is just not. That's not what this community is about, man. Like, drink what you like, learn new things, always try the new wine. I've been doing a lot of work in the Balkans lately. Best Syrah I've ever had in my life was made in Montenegro. I've spent a lot of time drinking Syrah in Washington State. The best Syrah I've ever had in my life was made in Montenegro. Just try new stuff, enjoy it, and be confident enough to go, well, I like this, so I'm drinking it.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. Tell us about a favorite childhood food that you loved and what you would pair it with in terms of wine today.
Well, I'm afraid I was a big fan of McDonald's as a child, but you can't fix, I can't fix that anymore. No. Yeah, I know, my children too. I passed it on to them, the poor things. They love Happy Meals. I really, really enjoy steak. I'm from Nebraska. This is beef country. And in my mind, there is nothing better than Cabernet Sauvignon with a well-done steak, specifically Napa cabs. They're big and robust and stand on their own, but they're so beautiful with that steak. I just love it.
Yeah, it is a great match. Do you have a favorite wine gadget?
I've got a lot that I think are really silly.
Like?
No, I don't feel like I should probably sit here and malign $500 corkscrews, right? But I have been saving up. I don't have one yet, but there's that corkscrew / Osso, right? That opens old bottles, and I'm good with an Osso.
With the tongs? I think it is.
The Osso has the tongs, and then this thing has a corkscrew as well. So you screw the corkscrew down, and then you work the Osso around it, and it always perfectly removes the cork. They cost a couple $100, but if you're drinking old wine, I think it's worth it. So I'm excited about that, but I'll admit that I don't own one yet.
No, that's all right. They are useful. I just got one recently, and because they squeeze those old corks, which can easily fall apart because they're so dry.
Yeah, you don't have to shove more than one old cork into a bottle that you were excited about to go, okay, we need to figure this out.
Yeah. So if you could share a bottle of wine with anyone outside the wine world, living or dead, who would that be, and which bottle would you open, and what would you ask them?
Outside the wine world. Well, I'm going to get a little sentimental. I honeymooned in Napa. My wife has stopped drinking alcohol, which is a great choice for her. It's good for her health. She doesn't try to inflict that upon me. She's great about it, But we honeymooned in wine country in 2013, and my cellar is full of 2013s.
Huh.
And if one day she and I could pull the cork on one of those and just drink it and spend that time together, just one glass of wine, I would love to have that one more time.
Oh, that's nice. That's great. And if you could put up a billboard in downtown San Francisco, what would it say?
I just photographed a billboard in downtown San Francisco that I thought was really remarkable. And one of the things is that the billboards in downtown San Francisco are all about technology that you don't need. It's really annoying. So I photographed the one billboard I've seen in San Francisco that I thought was meaningful, and I will read it to you.
Okay.
I could paraphrase it, but I can just pull up my Instagram here where I posted it. And I just pulled up my Instagram, and you are the top hit. Wine Rich on Fire. Your book comes out the day after mine, and I can't wait to read it.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, so here it is. It says, "Hey, San Francisco, this is a sign you're not doing enough to fight anti-Semitism." Huh. And it's this massive, I don't know if it'll show up here, but it's this big billboard that I photographed off the interstate. And we're not, we're not doing enough to fight anti-Semitism. We're not doing enough to fight racism. We're not doing enough to empower women. But we could be. And so, damn it, let's get a move on.
Yeah, that's a good message. It's a good pattern interrupt. Which wine would you want to serve at your funeral? Not to get morbid, but...
No, it's fine. All of them.
All of them?
We'll see how what my children wind up enjoying, and if they're wine drinkers, they can have my collection. I have a nice cellar. But if they're not, pull the corks.
Sure.
I've got a lot of great wine down there that I'm probably not going to get to, and I just want people to have a good time.
Lovely. I want to be invited. Not that I want you to kick off anytime soon, but it sounds like a good party.
It's the first time anybody's ever said, "I'd like to be at your funeral."
Yes.
Thank you.
It's going to be a good one. As we wrap up our, as we wrap up our conversation, is there anything we haven't covered that you'd like to mention, Mark?
So much. I love talking about wine. I could do this all day, but I'll just add the project I'm working on now is a book about Oakville, and Oakville is one of the nested AVAs in the Napa Valley. Right, it is where Robert Mondavi opened his winery. It's where the Tocolon vineyard is, and so many important wineries and important people more so are there. That's where Ren Harris is. My friends Barry and Jennifer Waite are in Oakville. The Nickel family set up shop in Oakville. So many, and they're just. It's such an extraordinary place, and it's very, very small, but so rich with history. I got to spend just a little time recently with Graham and Sarah McDonald, with Bonnie, the founder of Silver Oak, and Lisa, and so many terrific people. And now I get to tell their stories, and I'm really excited about what comes next.
That's great. Do you have a projected publish date for that one, or you're still sort of in the middle of it?
We're at the front end of it right now.
Okay.
And there are a lot of stories to tell, so it's going to take a while. But that's Oakville is where Nils Vengi made the first wine ever to earn 100 points in the United States. It was the 85 Groth Merlot, 85 Groth Cabernet Sauvignon. I drink more of their Merlot because I can afford it. But it's just the stories. The stories. It's so much fun.
Oh, that's terrific. So where can people get in touch with you, find you and your book online, and show your book again on the video, please, so we can all get a good look at it again? So, because it's available for pre-order now, but it'll be published by the time this episode is published. So
I would encourage you to go to your small family-owned neighborhood bookstore, whether that's the Napa Book Mine or the Plains Trading Company or the Bookworm or any other, and pre-order it. You can pre-order it on Amazon, but of course I think the former option is superior. But wherever you buy it, I'll be glad that you did. And you can track me down. I'm actually working on markgudgel.com right now. It was up, and I realized I didn't love it, so we took it down, and we're tinkering with it, and I have some friends helping me. But you can track me down. Check out Vin Nebraska. VIN Nebraska, so 2 N's in there. And you can reach me through that. And I'm on social media. I'm on Twitter, unfortunately. still, and I'm on Instagram, which I kind of enjoy. Mark Gudgel there, Gudgel. So please, track me down. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to talk wine with anybody who wants to.
Awesome. And we'll put all those links in the show notes as well if
Thank you.
people are scrambling to remember what those were. All right, Mark. Well, I raise my glass to you. Here's to the success of your book and your
Thank
launch.
you.
Congratulations. And I've really enjoyed chatting with you. I will say goodbye for now, but don't hang up.
Thank you. Thank you. I won't. I
right.
appreciate it, Natalie. It's really been a pleasure.
Oh, thank you, Mark. Great chat.